Hi, I'm Kaya.
And I'm Joanna.
And this is Starlit Citadel Reviews.
Evolution is an evolution-themed tactical card game from Dominic Crapuchette, Dimitri Noor, Sergei Machin, and North Star Games.
In Evolution, players create and grow a collection of species in the hopes of out-surviving their opponents. Plays with 2 to 6 players in about an hour.
Players begin Evolution by taking a food token bag and species board and placing 1 cube each in the first spaces of the body size and population tracks. They place the watering hole board in the center of the table, create a supply from the food tokens, shuffle the trait cards to form a deck, and select the first player. Then the game begins.
Each round of Evolution consists of 4 phases: dealing cards, selecting food, playing cards, and feeding. In the first phase, each player is dealt 3 cards, plus 1 for every species they have.
Next, each player secretly chooses one of the trait cards in their hand and places it face down on the watering hole. The number on the lower right of the card will help determine the amount of available food that round.
In the third phase, each player takes a turn playing as many trait cards as they'd like out of their hand. A trait card can be played in one of 3 ways. So if you play a trait card face down above a species board, you assign that species that trait. And traits are going to affect both how you collect food and defend yourself from attack in later phases.
No species can have more than 3 traits, nor can they have 2 identical traits. If you'd like to add a trait to a species that already has 3 cards, you can discard 1 existing trait card and replace it with a new face-down trait.
You can discard 1 trait card face up to create a new species, collecting its board and placing tokens in the first slots of both of its tracks. You can also discard 1 trait card face up to increase a species' body size or population by 1, up to a maximum of 6. Once all players have taken their turn playing cards, everyone flips their new traits face up.
In the final phase, players flip the cards on the watering hole face up and add or subtract an amount of plant food from the watering hole equal to the total value of the cards. Some traits with the leaf symbol are activated at this time.
Next, everyone feeds one of their hungry species in turn. A species is hungry if it has less food than population. So to feed a non-carnivore species, a player takes 1 plant food token from the watering hole and places it on their species board. Some traits may allow you to take extra food at this time, but you can never have more food than population.
Carnivores can never eat plant food and must attack another species to eat. They can only attack a species that has a smaller body size and doesn't have adequate defensive traits to save itself. The attacked species loses 1 population, and the carnivore gains 1 food from the bank.
If a species population drops to 0, it becomes extinct. Its player discards its species board and trait cards, and then draws a number of new trait cards equal to the amount discarded. If they had any food on its species board, that goes into its player's food token bag.
Players keep taking turns feeding their hungry species until there are no hungry species left, or until available food runs out. If there are some species that are still hungry, their population is reduced to their food level. Next, players take their food tokens and place them inside their food token bags. Any player who doesn't have any species left is given a new one, and the starting player token is passed left.
If the trait card deck needs to be shuffled in order to deal out enough cards at the start of a round, that triggers the end of the game. So at the end of that round, players will collect 1 point for every food token in their bag, and 1 point for every population and trait card on their surviving species. The player with the most points wins.
So I'm actually a really big fan of this game. I might be a little bit biased because I do have a background in biology and evolutionary biology and all that kind of stuff, so I was really interested to see how those concepts were going to be applied to a board game situation, so I was already very interested. But I do really like how they've applied the theme to the mechanics. I like how you are probably going to lose a lot of species over the course of the game. It's really difficult to fit a niche, and you are going to be eaten, and you are going to run out of food, and it's very challenging, and I think it reflects the theme quite well. Now, this game is quick. It's great for new players because it's quite easy to learn, but it's also got enough tactical strength in it that it's going to be interesting for more experienced players. So you're not going to get tired of this game. Also, the traits that you assign to your species can work together in sort of synergies. So it's going to be fun and interesting for you to try and figure out which traits to put together, how exactly one species should work, and how they're going to interact with other species at the table, both in front of you and in front of other players. So I think there's a lot of great stuff going on here. Also, I'm really excited by the fact that the game can go up to 6 players. I think that's great. I like to see sort of larger played games, especially with a game that's quick like this. It's great to see. Now, one possible negative that you should keep in mind is that there isn't really a catch-up mechanic in this game. So if there's a player who's falling behind, who's low on points, whose species have been eaten a few too many times, there isn't really an easy way for them to catch up and to really get back in the game. So watch for that.
Now, given how much we've talked about your species getting eaten in this game, one of the other potential challenges should be quite apparent, and that's that the introduction of carnivores makes for a very directly confrontational game. This is not a game with indirect interaction. This is not a game where you can quietly build your species and just sort of see them flourish and be happy that they're growing and everything is lovely. As soon as a carnivore is introduced, at some point, you're going to get eaten. It sucks, or at least it does the first time. After a while, you kind of get used to it. But it does mean that this is a game that may not be a good fit for more timid players or for players who do prefer indirect interaction. The confrontation and the need to defend yourself against predators is built right into this game. It's not something that can be avoided, and it does create a very intense and aggressively interactive game. So that could be fun for a lot of people, but it's definitely something to watch out for if it's not something that you generally enjoy. Probably my favorite thing about Evolution, and I also liked it quite a bit, is the particular tactical challenge that's posed by the fact that there's a fairly limited number of traits that actually come up. I mean, it's not that there's a small number to choose from. There's, I think, well over a dozen different traits in the game, but you do kind of know what's coming. You do know what's out there. There isn't like an infinite number of cards that you can just kind of get lost in. And it does create this tension where you know that you've got one trait that's really good right now, but if another trait pops up in another species, it's going to completely wipe out your advantage. So there's a really interesting timing game that happens because of that, where your species isn't going to be really awesome at the beginning of the game and really awesome in the middle of the game and really awesome at the end. It's going to have its highs and lows, and that's because of the environment that's created by the other players' choices. So you do get this very interactive ecosystem that's entirely the product of you making interesting decisions with a fairly limited pool of choices. I think it's really great game design, and it makes for an incredibly fun atmosphere. The last thing that I really do have to bring up is the components. It's a very cleverly designed game. There's neat touches like putting pictures from the trait cards on the food token bags to make them unique. I like the fact that the food tokens are double-sided so that you've got the plants on one side and the meat on the other side, depending on how you're going to use it. It's clear that there's a lot of thought that went into it. And also there's this guy. This has got to be the best starting player token in any game ever. I mean, look at it. It's a giant dinosaur. It's awesome. And it's a little bit silly, perhaps, to point out something like that, but it is an indicator of just how much care went into making this game fun and functional at the same time, and it really is a delight.
Aw, your Swarmanom ate my Mega Geek.